you can find your hand icon and raise your hand there. Or you can also send a chat, which is also at the bottom of the screen to the right. It says chat, hit that, type your question to me, and hit enter, and it'll send right over to me.
Thanks, Michelle. Jake said we're up and running now with the audio, so I will go ahead and call this Tuesday, January 19th, 2021 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. We are meeting remotely via WebEx, and thank you to those who elected to participate this evening remotely. Appreciate it. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. With that said, we'll move on to item 3, which are communications from the public. Please note we do have 2 public hearings scheduled this evening. If you're here to comment on the proposed use of the resort tax monies or a resolution approving an agreement with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for the Beaver Lake fishing access, please wait until I call those individual hearings. Otherwise, if you have anything to share with the council, now is your opportunity. And for the record, your name and address, please. Michelle.
So this would be the time for you to raise your hand if you are interested in speaking towards anything other than the 2 public hearings. You can use the chat, you can hover over the participants list for your name, hit the hand icon, or the 3 dots down at the bottom of the screen, right click and find your hand icon. We do have 1 so far, and that's Rhonda. If you'd like to, you can unmute your.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to make a comment on the recycling bid proposal that you're going to address later in the meeting. And because it's not a public hearing, I thought I would just make a comment right now. And basically, I just want to congratulate you on proceeding with this. It's a great thing, and I'm glad you're tackling it. And I would like to encourage you to remember to allocate an area for compostable drop-off as well, because composting is, of course, recycling. And we do have at least 1 industrial recycling operation, so people could separate their food scraps in recyclable packaging, which there is a lot of in this community, and have that actually have a full circle, literally recycle it right here in our community. So I hope when you get around to the location for a central recycling hub that you would include a compost drop-off for the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I normally don't comment on communications from the public, but just in case you're wanting to stick around, I believe we do have a counselor that may be discussing that very issue later in the evening when we close the meeting under communications from the city council. So you're welcome to stick around for that if you have time. Thank you. Michelle.
So just a little bit longer. Rhonda, can you right click on your hand and lower your hand for me, please? So also just to remind everybody, when you do public comment or during the public hearing, please state your name and address for us for our records. And I don't see anybody else who would like to speak.
Thank you, Michelle. With that said, we will move on to communications from volunteer boards. I do see we do have several folks from the public that are on this evening that may be part of a volunteer board, so I'll just reach out to the attendees. Any volunteer board reports tonight, you can just show your hand and then we'll acknowledge you. And I'm not seeing any. Michelle, are you?
No, I'm not.
Thank you. We'll go back to council. Any volunteer board reports from the city council this evening? Andy?
No.
Okay. Ryan?
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councilor Norton?
we're meeting with the strategic housing meeting is next Tuesday, but we haven't done that yet. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Councillor Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And finally, Councillor Cornell.
Planning board is this Thursday, and we have a few things on the agenda, which we will probably see a couple of them in our next meeting.
Great, thanks, Steve. With that said, we'll move on to our consent agenda. You have the minutes from both the special and regular sessions that were held on January 4th, 2021. Any additions or edits to the minutes? Otherwise, can I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion with 2 corrections, please, to approve. Well, the special session was fine as is. The regular session, I had 2 corrections. Sorry, Michelle, I didn't get this to you early, but page 27, under Quinnell is what starts at the paragraph. The 4th line down, Danish has a capital D. And then under Davis, page 27, at the end of the first line, there should be an S at the end of likes. And that's it. So thank you.
Is there a second to the motion as corrected?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ryan. Further discussion? Michelle, roll call, please.
Councillor Quinnell,
Aye.
Councillor Davis, I'm sorry, Ben, can you repeat that?
In favor.
Thank you. Councillor Hennon,
Aye.
Councillor Fury,
In favor.
Councillor Norton,
Aye.
and I'd like to also remind everybody that Councillor Sweeney is absent tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. And that motion does carry unanimously. And that brings us on to item 6 of our agenda, which is our first public hearing, item 6A, which is a consideration of the proposed use of resort tax monies to be included in the ballot language. And this is just a continuation of our June 15th, 2020 work session where we directed staff to advertise and hold a public hearing so that we can garner public input on the reallocation process and how those monies will be reflected in the updated or new ballot language. With that said, I will turn it back to Dana. I know she was having some audio problems. Are you back with us, Dana?
I think so. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good thing I live with a tech guy because I started to panic. I called my cell phone. Anyways, we're back on track. I'm going to share with you the PDF version of what's in the packet for those that are joining us online and also watching. And my internet looks like it's slowed. Oh, there we go. 1 second. Slow to share. Are you seeing the PDF document?
We're not.
Okay, so you can see the.
There you go, Dana. Now we can see it.
Okay. I get down to my page, which really is what we're talking about this evening. So with the update to our resort tax coming forward this fall, we're going to be going to voters asking approval to continue tax for an additional 20 years. And I'm seeing spinning. Are you guys hearing me okay? I can go to a different room if I need to.
You're kind of breaking up a bit.
I just want to make sure I'm not breaking up too bad.
You're breaking up a bit.
Oh, okay. Second. Okay.
While you're relocating, I'll just remind everybody at this time. If you want to speak towards this agenda item, now would be the time to raise your hand through those options that I've mentioned before. Right click to the participants page, click on your hand icon through the chat or the three dots at the bottom of the page. I do see Chuck Stearns, so your hand is raised, so we will, when we open up the public hearing, we will address you.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Fingers crossed, I'm a little bit closer to our Wi-Fi hub, so hopefully I won't break up. So as we, sounds better? Okay. So as we move forward with the resort tax reauthorization and reallocation, we were directed at the last work session to bring this forward in a public hearing. It has not been drafted in any type of resolution format yet because we are still in that draft form. And we want to be able to provide the public an opportunity to comment on our proposed language. Again, we've gone through a couple work sessions now, but the time is drawing near. We're already at the 19th of 2021 in January, and we do have to have this prepared by the in August, but we will of course have other steps before then. What you have for proposed uses maintains the 25% for property tax relief of the full 3%. We also will have 58% of the 3% for streets, storm sewers, all underground utilities, sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. This includes both repair and maintenance and improvement. One of the key changes in this section is that it does not just include for the current infrastructure, but it provides for new infrastructure. And that's a big change from the previous language because we could only do repairs to current streets. Now you could, or sidewalks, now you could put in a section of sidewalk that might be needed. You could do a connection West 7th to Spokane, as we know that that's been called for a long time. This would allow these funds to accumulate for new street projects as well. We also have the improvements and maintenance now of the bicycle and pedestrian paths and other park acquisition, capital improvements, and equipment. That's been increased from 5% of 2% to the 10% of the full 3%. The changes there, really, we added maintenance. We also clarified that there are other park acquisition costs that could be used, as well as equipment. And equipment is one of those ones, this would not be a typical use for equipment, but say when we are maintaining a bicycle path, we might need a piece of equipment to maintain that path. This would be, it just allows these funds to be used. Again, the city council at any meeting, the city council at their annual budget process, they would appropriate the funds based on recommendations often received from the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee. From that, we also added in a portion of resort tax allocation to the Whitefish Trail. It is a city asset that drives a significant amount of our tourism during the summer months. People enjoy our growing trails, and what better way to support this than through resort tax when we have people visiting and using those trails. Obviously, in the future, it could be that the philanthropy that's needed to continue to maintain those trails isn't there. And this just provides us a safeguard to make sure that that asset is maintained in perpetuity. That would be 2% of the 3%. We did still leave in the amount, or leave in a special item in here where it says if it's not spent within 5 fiscal years, that it may be appropriated to other bicycle and pedestrian paths within the city for the maintenance. This section only applies to maintenance and not improvements other than existing improvements. So when we say the word improvements in an accounting term, versus maintenance, oftentimes people think that, replacing a bridge is just repair and maintenance. But really, for our accounting terms, that's actually an improvement and a capital expenditure. So this is just clarifying that, yes, we can use these funds to replace a bridge that needs to be replaced, or anything like the pavilions or a bathroom that's already there. we can replace it. However, we aren't going to expand the trail with these funds, nor will we add any more amenities to the trail than what is already there. And then, of course, we have the 5% that is that stays with the merchants at the time of sale, and so that's so that they can administer our resort tax. When they collect credit cards and collect the resort tax via credit card, there's a 3% fee sometimes. Again, this goes to cover that expense. So I will just briefly touch on what this means in dollar amounts. So in fiscal year 20, I provided the actual figures of what we collected. So in fiscal year 20, we collected $4,270,000. Of that, $1.1 million went back to property taxpayers. We were able to allocate 1.95 roughly million to streets and about 150,000 to the Parks and Rec department. And when I say department, I mean both their trails as well as their park improvements. Then we also have the Haskell Basin Conservation Easement Debt Service, and that was roughly 1.05 million. That is the amount that actually gets reallocated in our proposal. So instead of going from a 3% to a 2%, we're reallocating the full amount. As you can see, based on the one below, based on fiscal year 20 collections, which we know have dipped somewhat due to COVID, you can definitely see that, property tax relief remains the same. Streets, even though the percentage is going from 65% of 2% to 58% of 3%, that amount actually increases about $500,000. The Parks and Recreation, which also includes bike paths, will increase from 150,000 to 450,000. And then you can see we've added in the Whitefish Trail, which would be a new category with about $100,000. Now, keep in mind, fiscal year 20 is a one snapshot in time. Over time, we have seen our resort tax increase about 5 to 6% on average. We've had dips in there, no doubt, where it drops, might take a good drop. But overall, the average since we started resort tax is just under a 6% increase. So you can anticipate that these numbers will grow. The important part also to know about this is this would be effective February 1 of 2025. And so these amounts would not be allocated in the proposed fashion if approved by voters until that period. And again, because we do have to pay off the debt, which our last debt payment is January 1st of 2025. So I might just double check that I got everything here. We do have the ballot language that will be due to the county, and I believe it's August. Let's see, we're in here. It's August 16th. There we go. August 16th of this year. But before that, we're going to have a lot of education that needs to be provided. We have to go through a resolution calling for a vote. There's specific noticing requirements. And we'll want to just do a little bit more education about how beneficial our resort tax has been. And I know our resort tax monitoring committee is very active in that area. And I think we'll continue to be as we move forward to the vote. So with that, there's no financial requirements today. We are just looking at the proposed language, hoping to get some additional feedback from the public. I can tell you Polson is out right now with their vote on resort tax. So Columbia Falls passed theirs this past spring. Polson is asking their voters right now. So it's definitely been a topic of discussion among communities. It seems like Kalispell will just be surrounded by potentially resort communities. So with that, I will turn it back to the council. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Dana. We'll start with Councilor Fury. Any questions for Dana on her staff report?
No questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Andy. Councilor Hennon.
No questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Councilor Norton.
Yep, Dana, thanks for the detail. One question I had is, if a piece of property became available within city limits where we could expand our park use, like along the river, or if we did some kind of open space thing, would the money that's being allocated to the parks department be able to be used for that within city limits?
As drafted, that is the case. Again, the timing, you would take some time to accrue funds. And then if you can prove it, we've done that with our Haskell Basin bond. You may be able to bond your resort tax as well if it's a large purchase, but park acquisition would be available.
Okay. And then the other question I had is, we've had some projects where paying for underground utilities was a really big expense, but is that what we're going to all the time now? Or is like that's listed in your list? I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
You are, Rebecca. We do include we can, and Craig can correct me if I'm wrong, if we do have underground utilities that need to be replaced, we do so at that time, including stormwater is frequently the one that is done with our street reconstruction projects, as well as sidewalks. But
okay.
I can't think of one though that we've done the water and sewer improvements on, Craig, recently.
Okay. I just wanted, I mean, it's much better. It looks a lot nicer, and but I just was glad that was included. So the only other thing, I'm really happy that we're doing it this way. So I appreciate everybody coming up with this plan. The only long-term concern I had was historic preservation, and I just don't know how else we would fund a program to help facilitate that. But I know we're not going to add it to this resort tax. I brought it up initially though because I felt like it was another way to access funding. But I'm just putting that out there. I still think it's very upsetting to a lot of people that live here to see our the old town character being replaced. Even though the architecture is nice, it's still kind of like Anywhere USA kind of versus distinctly Whitefish. And so I still think that should be a goal for us, is to have funding and a program available through our planning department and possibly Public Works helping, so that if properties are changing and we can access historic buildings and move them or help people renovate historic buildings versus tear them down, I think that would be a good goal for where we're at with our growth. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Councillor Davis, questions?
Questions, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And finally, Councillor Cornell.
No questions. Just a quick one. Just to piggyback on what Rebecca was saying, is there a way to possibly move funds towards historic preservation in terms of parks? Or would that be a stretch?
I think that would be a stretch in how this language is drafted, but I can tell you there are a couple bills at the legislature that, I think could be helpful if passed, and I think it's always something that the council can look at with the general fund dollars that were released from the TIF. If that's a program you want to start, there is that opportunity. But I don't think that resort tax, the way that it's drafted, would apply.
Thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Steve. I just had a couple questions, Dana, and I'm not sure these were addressed in our work session this summer. It's related to Whitefish Trail maintenance, and I know these are minor expenditures in the big picture for both the city and Whitefish Legacy Partners, but when we refer to this allocation for maintenance, could those dollars be used for items such as like dust abatement, plowing, garbage pickup, etc.?
Yep, that would all be part of maintenance of the trail.
Okay, and then secondly, as those dollars come in, would they be held by the city, or would there be an MOU drafted between the city and WLP, assuming they're obviously going to stick around? And would they be administering those dollars or putting those dollars on the ground, or would it be a combination of city and WLP?
That's a really good question. The resort tax is city funds that would be collected by the city and maintained in our coffers. The city council then every year appropriates those funds. So, assuming Whitefish Legacy Partners is here, just like the Parks Department presents a budget for the council to consider for their capital projects, we would see a similar process with Whitefish Trail. Legacy Partners already helps prepare those budgets. What we would just be adding to is that resort tax portion.
Okay, so it could be a split between city as well as WLP resources in terms of how those dollars are allocated.
Yeah, so if say 15 years down the road we have some city staff that are also working on it, you could use those funds for the maintenance of the trail as a city. So the council ultimately has full control of those dollars.
Now, do those dollars in that scenario, hypothetically down the road, if the city does take over more responsibility with trail maintenance, could those dollars be used for wages, salaries, or on the ground dollars only?
It would be salaries would be eligible as long as they were salaries going to the maintenance of the trail.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions from the council or further comments from you, Dana, or any other staff members?
I would just make a comment on the salaries part. I do not recommend resort tax being used for salaries, although I know Columbia Falls might intend to. I worry about the volatility of it. But again, it's still another funding source that we have at our disposal, especially for like seasonals where it might be a temporary position, but just that caveat, but that's it.
No, I'm glad you said that, because that certainly wasn't my intent. I was not implying that I hope these dollars can be used for salaries. I really, really hope they are not.
Yeah.
So these monies need to go onto the ground. With that said, I'm going to turn it back to Michelle to entertain our public comment this evening. I know we do have 2 members of the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee here. In addition to Andy Fury, we have Chris Schustrom as well as Chuck Stearns. Just wanted to thank you both for participating, and I'll let Michelle manage the public comment.
Okay, so if you are wanting to speak towards this agenda item, please raise your hand with those 3 options that I've mentioned before. When you speak, please state your name and address at the beginning so that we can put that into our public record. And first and foremost, Chuck Stearns, you can unmute and.
Well, thank you. Chuck Stearns, 698 Woodside Lane. First anyways, I don't know about the other part of that, but I'd like to thank the mayor and city council for this public hearing. I think it's an important educational process for the public. I'm a strong supporter of the resort tax and extending the resort tax. So it's essential to our community. I think most of the council, probably all, and certainly all of the resort tax monitoring committee members are aware of the history of reconstruction versus maintenance, but I think it's worth mentioning just a little bit. A lot of the support for the resort tax was to fix the city roads, which were more potholes at times than asphalt. And the original supporters and proponents and how it was advertised or how the education went was it would not be maintenance, it would be reconstruction, because we have very poor clay soils underneath our roads, and you need to go down 4 to 6 feet and take those out and then bring back in new materials so that the roads just don't continue to deteriorate. And that's why the projects are very expensive and why they take a long time, because they're digging down quite a ways and replacing that clay base with better materials. However, I do think at this point, it is good to add maintenance. I really like what Public Works has been doing with crack sealing on Baker Avenue and the slurry seal or the sealing of Colorado Avenue. And I really think that that could be expanded, because it's a great way to make our roads last longer rather than having to reconstruct them more often. I do have some concerns with adding equipment. Equipment can tend to be a big black hole at times. Department heads always want more equipment, and I would not want to invest in equipment at the expense of the reconstructions of the roads. Our current reconstruction timeframe for projects is already probably 15 to 20 years out, and putting money into equipment will just stretch that out further. I support the parks trails maintenance and the 2% for the Whitefish trail maintenance. That's a very small allocation for something like that. My biggest topic really is, I think the city council might want to consider an allocation to support and improve local transit. I think improving local transit was a recommendation in the Sustainable Tourism Plan. And I think it'll be hard to do any improvements to local transit without a tax infusion. And resort tax is more appropriate and palatable than the property tax. I think it would be very hard in the future to put property tax funds into local transit unless there was a vote of the people. I think if you went to the people for a mill levy, that's possible. But there's also a better connection or nexus between tourist traffic, which generates the problems, especially in the summer, and using resort taxes generated a lot from tourists to improve local transit and diminish traffic congestion. I was in part of my career in Colorado ski towns, and pretty much every ski town down there that runs a free bus service allocates 1% or more of their sales taxes to operate the bus. We don't have, Whitefish wouldn't have that ability to do that, but if you did something modest, like 3% of the 3% tax, that would generate $150,000 a year at current revenues. And you could work with Eagle Transit, I think is the best long-term solution, because they already want to improve service. They get the federal funds for transit. And if you were to provide some money to them, they could improve the local service and have more consistent schedules, better and more often stops and regular stops. I think that 3% would probably have to come at the expense of the streets allocation. That's the only place that I really saw it, but there's also a logical connection in that transit runs on the streets, and it's almost similar to investing in the street infrastructure or that sort of thing. So those are the comments that I have. I think that if you ever want to decrease traffic congestion, especially in the summer, I think transit is a big way to do it. And this, to me, is a good opportunity and time to do it, because it's a well-traveled thing is to put sales taxes into supporting local transit. But I thank you for considering these comments, and good luck in your deliberations.
Hey, Chuck, I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You and I worked very closely on the ballot language for the Haskell Basin conservation easement, and something that you consistently reiterated to me was not wanting to complicate the language. And to that point, I guess my first question is, are you comfortable with the language as drafted? And then secondly, if we were to consider local transit as an example, would that complicate it further and put at risk the ballot passing?
Those are good questions, and I agree with that general sentiment and the opinion of the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee to keep it simple, not change it very much. It's been successful and it's worked. I also just think this is sort of the opportunity to do it. There is that risk, and people may have an objection. Anytime you would do a change, there's certainly potential for an objection. I do think if you felt it was worthwhile, you've got more than one opportunity to go to the voters. You could include it, and if it failed, do some focus groups or find out why it failed. And if transit improved transit was a big button item, then you could go back. But again, at 3%, I don't think it's that much. I don't think it would raise the ire, but I do agree with you. Keeping it simple is probably the best path for passage.
Thanks, Chuck. Michelle.
Okay, Joan Vetter-Ehrenberg, you can unmute your mic.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, Joan Vetter-Ehrenberg, 744 Hidden Valley Drive. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to call in and see you guys. Thank you for your service during these difficult times. I was in the Whitefish CVB in 1995 in the initial phases of the resort tax with a lot of members here, and fully in support of continuing the resort tax for Whitefish. I do see a couple of needs for our future growth of our community that we could look into, and I don't know that we're meeting those needs as well, or currently. And one of those is connectivity with bike paths and pedestrian paths. And we have a huge problem with that. And there's some inherent, very difficult problems with the way our state highways run, but we have to continue to work for bike connectivity. And so I would support an increase in the bike portion of the resort tax allocation coming from the streets. I also do definitely support the Whitefish Trail, adding that to the mix. We see trailheads. I was just up at Spencer Trail, and the parking is, super small, and there's people all over the place. And, we have to remember, we are not just a summer destination. We are a year-round destination, and our shoulder seasons are getting shorter and shorter. So we have to be continually thinking of how we're going to manage this. So for Chuck's promotion of park and Eagle Transit and public transportation, we really have to look at that hard and say, where can we put park and ride locations where it may be just people, carpooling to Kalispell or Columbia Falls where they live and they work in Whitefish, or simply the snow bus to pick people up and drop them off. Or, what if we actually get smart and put parking all along the railroad and have, a train from Whitefish to East Glacier? So let's plan 10 and 20 years out for what our vision needs to look for and lay the foundation now. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Joan.
And Heidi Van Everen, you can unmute your mic.
Awesome. Heidi Van Everen, 4 Pine Avenue in Whitefish. I want to thank you all. I'm the executive director of Whitefish Legacy Partners. I've been tracking and participating in the reworking of the allocation for the resort tax, and I really commend you all for looking ahead and thinking about maintenance and continuing to do that. I think so few communities in the state and nationwide really think about maintenance and the infrastructure of our trails and paths and streets. And we've made huge improvements over the years with the streets. And I'm thankful that you continue to plan ahead. And I just wanted to mention, Mayor Mulfeld asked about, how we would actually, if a percentage of resort tax goes into the Whitefish Trail maintenance, how that would be handled. And we do have, a lot of systems in place now. We have, the city holds a Whitefish Trail grant fund that you manage on behalf of the Whitefish Trail. And we, as one partner in the project, make contributions twice a year to that fund, as do other partners, including Flathead Area Mountain Bikers and Glacier Nordic and and other groups that help. So there's already systems in place to manage that. And so I think that we're leagues ahead in how this, could look if voters approve it in 2025 or approve it for 2025. So thank you for thinking ahead now and getting ahead of this so that we can make sure that we figure out how it should be managed on behalf of the public.
Thanks, Heidi.
Okay, Rhonda Fitzgerald, you can unmute your mic.
Okay. Yes. So I congratulate you. I think I agree with everything in this proposed
Sorry,
legislation.
Rhonda, can you repeat your name and address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. And I forgot it when I made my public comment at the beginning to Michelle. Sorry about that. I think I agree with everything in this, in the proposal. I wanted to make kind of a pitch for the idea of keeping the conservation easement concept in it, because I think that part of the reason the increase to 3% was so broadly approved by the community was because it contained a conservation easement component. And I know that I am a member of a number of committees in which people are always bringing up the fact that we need the ability to expand lands that we can put into conservation or open space. And we don't have a mechanism for that. And I do think, since it was already part of the resort tax, it's perhaps a simpler process to include some language around that and identify some funds to go toward conservation and open space acquisition. And I would really encourage you to not take that part out of the existing program. And I am a big supporter of transit and of the snow bus, and always have been, big advocate for it. And I too lived in ski towns in Colorado. But I have to say that the programs that are run in those towns, first of all, their entire economy is tourists, and they have very large sales taxes, and the programs are very, very expensive, multi-million-dollar programs. And I was looking at the transportation plan existing conditions report, and right now, Eagle Transit's ride, like if you call from the Manor to get a ride to the store, those rides are running $12 per ride. So $25 round trip. And the snow buses rides pencil out at $20. No, wait a minute, the other way around. The Eagle Transit are $20 a ride. The snow bus is $12 each way per passenger. And that's a pretty significant cost to provide transit. And I'm just worried that we don't have the kind of community where we can be providing the kind of transit that people need, because they're coming from all different points at all different times and going to all different points. And it would be a whole system. So I'm not so, I agree with Chuck that transit would be great to have, but I'm not sure this is the funding mechanism from my perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Okay, Chris Schustrom, you can unmute your mic and state your name and address for us, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Chris Schustrom, 504 Spokane Avenue. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. I'm currently the vice chair of the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee, and first I just wanted to confirm our communication to you that I saw in the packet. The committee voted unanimously to recommend that the council move forward with the proposed language as proposed by city staff and the council. These are all great projects. So then wearing another hat, from 1998 through 2018, I coordinated the snow bus as the chairman of the snow bus committee on the Big Mountain Commercial Association. For my last 3 years, I coordinated the Glacier Park Express bus, where the Big Mountain Commercial Association, and huge thank you to basically Whitefish Mountain Resort, because most of the funding for the snow bus comes from their assessment. We spent $80,000 a summer to run a bus to and from Glacier Park. And the ridership was minimal at best. And we tried to work with Eagle Transit, and I think they're making some good improvements. But as far as changing the proposed allocation of resort tax to put a little bit of money into transit, I don't think transit is there yet. And I would agree with Rhonda's comment that transit in our area is super complicated because of the way different people arrive into the area. Some people fly, some people drive. Visitors don't just fly in and then get on a bus and go to different places. So to make a short comment long, I don't think it's the right time to move those funds to transit, although I'm a huge supporter of it. The other thing is I'd rather not see funds be taken away from streets. Looking at the priority list, there are a lot of projects that we have coming up, and they're all really important projects, and I really like that we basically stayed true to the original intent of the resort tax and continuing to rebuild streets, some in the neighborhoods, some arterials. And I really, really like the fact that the city can now make those important connections on not just existing streets, but to help our transportation grid as well. So I applaud the council moving forward with working to renew the resort tax, and I'm sure I speak for the resort tax committee in saying that we're happy to help get the word out and inform people as the process goes along. Thank you.
I had a follow-up for Chris, Michelle, unless there's others that would like to comment this evening.
As far as right now, there's no other comments.
Okay, and maybe it's a question for Andy, Chuck, or Chris. When we increased the resort tax in 2015 from 2% to 3%, you recall we worked with Legacy Partners, meeting the city, on the Get Out the Vote campaign for our water supply. And it was a pretty big effort. We fundraised, I believe, close to $70,000 or $80,000 for a PR campaign that we ran for about 4 months in advance of the vote. And we also had a committee that worked specifically on that effort. Has the resort tax committee given any thought to how you can help the city with public outreach and education as we approach the vote?
Andy, I can answer that, or Andy, if you'd like to, whatever works for you.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say the resort tax has talked about it. We'll definitely, based on the final language and the discussions as they move forward in the resolution, be happy to put an op-ed in the different newspapers. The way the resort tax was basically supported when it was first implemented was that business owners downtown from long-standing businesses went door to door and talked to people. It was a grassroots effort and a community effort. I think that definitely that could happen again as far as informing people. And I think it's important to make sure that property owners in the city understand the benefit of the property tax relief, because there are a lot of new residents in Whitefish. And so perhaps a mailing, maybe the city could include that in the Stumptown Scoop or some other mechanism, but that's sort of the broad brush strokes. Those are really the only things I recall us talking about at this point, not a full-on campaign at all. So, I mean, we haven't talked about that, and I like it. I personally like the grassroots approach because that's how the resort tax has always been sort of communicated about.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not just a question for your committee, but I guess it's a broader question for Dana, staff, and the council, because it is on our adopted goals list under department goal to create a resort tax education and reallocation plan. We're clearly discussing the plan this evening, and as the ballot language gets, refined and approved by the council, if not this evening. I guess the next step would be that resort tax education rollout plan, Dana. I just would, maybe if you have any thoughts on that this evening that you might like to share with us.
Sure. Yeah. So once we have kind of the draft language and we're getting out the information for you call for the vote, we have the draft language, it becomes education about what has resort tax done good. And here's the question that we're asking you. As public employees and officials, we have to be cautious about, telling people which way to vote when we're going to the voters. But what we can do is show them exactly what this can do for them. So, with the resort tax, how much have we accomplished? So we will work on, including articles in the Stumptown Scoop. We will work with the resort tax committee. I think that's kind of the next step, is to come up with ideas on how do we reach the public and inform them of what's going on. We'll do mailings, just explaining what the changes are and what it means. I know that's been the approach of both Columbia Falls and Polson. I think the more outreach we can have, though, from our businesses who support it, the better. And so I think that's where we might lean on legacy partners and the Resort Tax Committee to get that word out. With legacy partners having buy-in in the current proposed language, they have a good group of people that they could probably reach out to. Heidi, I'm speaking for you, but I'm assuming you guys could at least say, here's the vote. You don't have to lean one way or the other necessarily as a nonprofit, but to just, educate with material. So I think we have a means of at least reaching individuals.
Do you think there would be any value, Dana, once the language is adopted and finalized, to convene kind of a smaller working group that maybe is comprised of, Heidi, the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee, city staff, elected officials, of course, maybe some prominent downtown business owners, and similar to how we handled the Get Out the Vote for Clean Water measure, kind of have a strategic plan in place that we can, roll out to the community. It's fairly targeted.
Yeah, I think I'll look into that a little bit. I just want to make sure we when you rely on business owners, they're going to be able to say, you need to vote yes, and here's why. From a city employee standpoint, I can't say you need to vote yes and here's why. I can say, here's what this does for you. You pick either way. So I think, let me look into that a little bit more. But I do think having a group, the Resort Tax Committee, is obviously the first stop. And we can definitely bring in Heidi and a counselor too, or you, John, if you'd like to join. Andy's already on the committee, but just to, formulate, like, here's when we'll do these mailings, here's where we'll post in the Whitefish pilot, we can come up with an education plan. And so, we'll start working on that. I think right now, once we get the language, then we can really provide the details of what it means.
Okay, I'm probably jumping ahead just in terms of next steps, but at hand right now is the actual language, but I appreciate the forward thinking on this. Michelle, is there any further public comment?
Not at this time.
Okay, I'll go ahead and I will close the public hearing on item 6A of the agenda and turn it back to the council for preferably a motion, or if not, a discussion. Who would like to begin?
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question of Chuck?
Absolutely.
If he would be willing to take it. Are you still there, Chuck?
I do see him.
Yes.
Oh. Hey, just to ask, regarding your comment on local transit, would you see that as being a subpart of item B, which is the item that deals with street funding, or would you see that as being its own line item in this proposal?
Well, I think if you put it in the same language with streets, it creates some flexibility for the council to allocate it as you see fit. You're not locked into a certain percentage as you would be. So that's a strategy. On the other hand, I think one could argue that if transit's so important, it should have percentage allocation. I think it could work either way. Certainly, if it's just in the discussion with streets, council has a lot of flexibility. But I'm not sure strategically or for education and passage which is best. I think for local transit, an earmarked percentage is probably best, but I would understand giving the council flexibility to allocate it as you would want to by just including it within streets. I think it could work either way.
Have any concerns about having it as its own line item, given that we don't really have a proposal that anything in front of us we know to spend it on?
I think that's a good point. It's sort of like that reversionary clause in the Whitefish Trail. If you don't use it within 5 years, it could revert back. And maybe you could have that in there. But again, that type of language always just tends to complicate people's understanding of it. But certainly,
Chuck, I think you're muted.
sorry, I didn't.
What's up?
I think it went off by itself. It probably got tired of my lengthy response, but I think if you included it with the streets, you certainly have the most flexibility, and it'd be sort of automatically reverting. So I think there's some good points to that aspect.
Yeah.
Further questions, Ben?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and address each counselor so we can move this forward. Andy, any comments or questions this evening?
Not at this time.
Yep. Counselor Hannon?
No comment right now from me, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Counselor Norton?
Yep, a couple. I actually like both Chuck's and Rhonda's ideas of keeping conservation potential in there, and then also a transportation option. I mean, and just since Chuck's on the call too, I think when we ran that campaign to get Haskell, that was like a very unique situation with really kind of big funding, and it was almost a miracle that happened. But there was a lot of anxiety that it might not happen. I think since then, our community has pretty much seen the great benefits of our resort tax and how it personally affects their daily lives and their recreation and even their home values, with having nice streets, sidewalks, all of that. And so I would really doubt if we're going to have a lot of opposition to getting it passed at this point. I'm the only thing I'm still confused about is if we kept conservation in there. I don't know. Dana was saying that park acquisition is already part of the deal. And we don't really have a transportation, well, I guess it would tie into our transportation plan, but anyways, I'm up for everything, I guess, because it is a 20-year plan. I think in 20 years we'll be much more of a biking destination at that point, and probably a lot more year-round activity. And so whatever we can do at this point to preserve the trails and expand them and maintain things is good. So this is why I love public comment. It changes the whole discussion when people show up. So thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And we'll move on to Councilor Davis.
Yeah, I think the only comment I would make, I think what's proposed is great. I would like to make a comment on the local transit idea. I do find that interesting, and I do find myself being a strong supporter of public transit, although I've never seen or really evaluated a proposal about it. So I don't really have any concept of what it costs or how it would be done or whatever. You know, the problem is the lifespan of this thing's really long. And so I do believe Chuck is correct that if we had such a system, this would be an ideal means to fund it. It very well may be that in the lifespan of this ballot initiative that we never do that. But it would be interesting to have the flexibility. I don't want to overcomplicate things, but I'm just sitting here wondering if you know, an extra comma and 2 words could be put into provision B, although I'm struggling to think of how that language would work to provide flexibility. But I don't feel strongly about it because, listen, it may be that we just never do that. And so, but it's definitely an interesting idea. But in general, I'm supportive of where we are, and I'm really glad that we have the additional funding for Parks and Rec and the trails.
Thanks, Ben. And finally, Councillor Cornell.
Yeah, my only comment is that I wish we could build in some flexibility for public transit, just like Ben said. I don't know if there's a way to include some of that language easily, and I don't know exactly where it would fit either. But looking down the road 20 years, we're already at a crisis point up on the mountain with parking. And more people that I talk to that I've known that usually drive up there are now riding the snow bus. So, I don't know. That's, I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Steve. Further comments from the council? I would just based on the comments I've heard from the council, I support the allocation as presented this evening. If we can quote Rhonda this evening, you know, the resort tax is oftentimes, like TIF was, Santa's grab bag. Everyone wants a piece of it, and we know that's the case. And while we'd like to give a piece to everyone, that's just not practical. And I agree with Chris Schustrom that we need to tie this reauthorization as closely as we can to the original intent when the resort tax was passed back in 1995 at a 54% margin, I might add. I agree with Chuck that transit is something that is needed in this community. I just don't think this is the mechanism upon which to do it, especially when we don't even have a transit plan crafted or conceptualized to present back to the voters when they ask the question, where's this money going to go to? We don't have a plan, but I agree that one is needed. So I think consistency and keeping the language is clear, concise, and simple and geared towards the original intent of the resort tax when it was originally passed is critical. And we saw that in some of the polling data when we did have the polling company from California assist us with the Haskell Basin effort. There was specific polling language that was asked of voters in town, both residents and businesses alike, regarding the ballot language. And there were definitely comments that came back because it was complicated ballot language, as you remember, Chuck. And there was concern expressed by this community about they quite didn't understand the language as written. And we had to, you know, use our education outreach program to educate folks on actually what it meant. So I support the allocation as written. Those are my comments tonight. I would certainly entertain a motion either one way or another. I could see this moving forward this evening. If you needed more time to consider public comment this evening, we could table it. And I see that Andy's hand is up. I will acknowledge Andy.
Dana, you get your hand up. Go ahead first, and then I'm going to make a motion after we hear from Dana, because she's smarter than I am.
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. One, nothing prohibits the city council from asking voters again, say 15 years down the road, that we've decided transportation should be added. We asked voters in 2004 after adopting it in 1986 for an extension. Then we asked in 2015. It's not something we like to bring up a lot, but if all of a sudden there's such a community need that it needs to be funded that way, it's an option. And then all right. Oh, and then this isn't the only and last time for public comment. When we go to the resolution calling for a vote, there will be additional time for public comment there. And so I think that, just remember that this isn't the last and only time for public comment on this project. So that's it.
Good points, Dana. Thank you. And I'll turn it back to Andy.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion, and that motion would be that we forward the draft language as presented to what are we doing with that? To calling for a vote, I guess. Is that how we do it? Is that what the resolution would be? Or calling for a resolution, or for a resolution calling for a vote, I guess is what it is, actually.
Based on the draft ballot language included in the packet?
That is correct, yes.
Is there a second to the motion?
Yep.
I believe that was seconded by Councillor Norton.
Yes.
Thank you, Rebecca. Andy, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I'll speak very quickly. Obviously, I have a lot of history with the resort tax, more than anybody in the room right there, as I can see right now. I think transportation, Chuck brings up a very, very valid point. My concern with that would be two things. The first is as Ben and everybody else brought up, we don't really have a plan right now. I don't know that we would generate the kind of revenue necessary to run a program. We could participate in a program possibly, but I think there's other sources of revenue for that. I listened to Dana when she says we don't want to count on things to run regular programs off of these kind of monies because they can fluctuate in a downturn. And I'd hate to hire a bunch of bus drivers and buy a bunch of buses and then find out that we can't pay to run them. I think that would be a problem. And I think transit's going to take a pretty hard look in this community because, I think Chris and Rhonda are right. It's complicated here. And yeah, just running up and down the hill is one thing, but I think there's other mechanisms for that. And my other concern is with adding that in as an addendum to provision B, is that one of the things that has always been the biggest selling point for the resort tax is that the monies, where they go, is specified. And I think if we start adding in relatively ambiguous things that don't have a plan, then we can maybe run afoul of the voters a little bit more. So that would be my only concern, I guess. And I think Dana made a really, really good point. We're going to have some more public hearings as we go along with this, and who knows, we may get a huge public outcrying. And should in 5 years we need to look at it again, we can always do that. But I mean, so that's my point.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Further comment from the council?
Just have one, Mayor.
Yes.
I think it's good though when people bring up these ideas that we actually address them. So like when aren't we redoing our transportation plan soon? I mean, I can't remember where that project's at, but maybe part of that could be this discussion that Chuck is bringing up so that we at least have it on the table and can figure out funding and when we might need it, what triggers we might have to see to get that going. And then like even conservation, like what Rhonda brought up, these are community goals for some people, but they don't necessarily have to go through the resort tax. Maybe we might be able to place them on other agendas to make sure that they're completed before it becomes a crisis. So thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further comments? Not seeing any. Michelle, roll call, please.
Councillor Quinnell?
Aye.
Councillor Davis?
Aye.
Councillor Hennon?
Aye.
Councillor Fury?
In favor.
And Councillor Norton?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That motion does carry unanimously. Thanks for everyone who called in tonight to participate in our public hearing. And with that, we'll move on to item 6B, which will be resolution 21-3, a resolution approving an agreement of memorandum of understanding with the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for the Beaver Lakes fishing access site. And this appears on page 36 of your packet.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. By way of background, since 2012, the city has held a deed of public recreation trust easement of their state lands located in the Beaver Lakes area. And there's really two parts of it. There's the recreation system, which is basically the Whitefish Trail and its amenities, and then there's the area outside the recreation system. Since 2004, we have leased a, I think it's 2 acres, fishing site to Montana Fish Wildlife, the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, to preserve basically access, fishing access to Beaver Lake. The initial lease required FWP to pay a yearly fee of $3,500 to the city, and the city in turn returns that to Whitefish Legacy Partners. It also required Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to maintain existing vehicle parking, to control weeds, to maintain the boat ramp, and to provide appropriate signs. Whitefish Legacy Partners in the city met with FWP in early 2018. The original lease was set to expire 5 years in 2019. So I believe it was at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks request. We met with them just to kind of talk about negotiating a new lease. At that time, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks told us that they didn't know if they would have the funds in the future to continue paying the $3,500. So we entered into just a 2-year extension of the lease. In February of last year, we met with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and Whitefish Legacy Partners. Again, I believe there was 3 representatives from FWP there, and they told us really in no uncertain terms that they did not have the money to continue to pay $3,500 lease fee. We were disappointed. I know Legacy Partners were disappointed, but I did think we had a productive conversation that talked about some creative solutions, including FWP contributing to other expenses that are kind of associated with that fishing site. And one other solution that I think what Heidi brought up was extremely creative, and that was having FWP explore the possibility of another designated fishing site within our easement area. And in particular, we were looking at Murray Lake. I don't know if you guys have been up to Murray lately, but it's, you know, people camp there, they fish there. It's not a designated spot. And from I've heard, I haven't been up there for a while. It's kind of a mess. So we did have a productive meeting and exchanged a draft of the MOU. And unfortunately, at that point, COVID hit and the negotiations kind of fell off. I know FWP had their hands full. We had our hands full. So it really took a longer time to negotiate it than we really would have liked. But FWP's legal did finally sign off on the proposed MOU in front of you in January of this year. So among other things, the MOU still provides that FWP will provide regular maintenance at the fishing site, including garbage pickup, signage, vegetation management, and other routine maintenance. It does provide that they will provide a portable bathroom and maintenance during the, I guess, high time that the fishing access is used. They did not do that last summer, and the reason why is they could not get somebody to take a portable latrine up there because of some of the maintenance that's needed on that DNRC road. As part of the timber cell, DNRC is performing some of that maintenance, so they're hopeful that they can do that next year. Fish, Wildlife, Parks will provide maintenance of the roads, boat ramp, and the parking area. They shall control weeds at the fishing site, and they shall explore the possibility of broadening the MOU to include one additional site, namely Murray Lake. This one is new, and this was, I think, part of one of their concessions. They will contribute up to 50% of the cost of road dust abatement on the county road, up to $1,000 annually, and they will pay for any capital improvements to the area, including to the boat ramp. Last time I was up there, the boat ramp was kind of in rough shape. And my understanding from FWP is capital improvements are actually in different funds, so there may be some funds in the future for some capital improvements. And finally, if it's deemed necessary, FWP will share in the capital improvement costs of a vault toilet. So our responsibility really is just to hold the easement. We or a designee, which would be WLP, will provide for the maintenance of the structures recently installed by WLP. There's a lakeshore platform and a trailhead kiosk that look really, really nice. So we would be maintaining those. I will say that FWP did tell me they had some initial conversations with DNRC about the possibility of additional designated access site, and those didn't go as well as they hoped.